Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting for November 20th, 2024.
Cool. So I've added a comment to have two items added to the agenda. Sunny, do you have anything in the agenda before we discuss this?
I have a few things, but they can wait. It's okay.
So okay, let's start with mine then, because they should go through them quite easy. Okay, so the first topic is around Yuri's PR. Give you a little bit of a background, and Yuri can correct me if I got it wrong. So we have TOPS decryption enabled in customized controller, right? So you can encrypt secrets in Git, and then when right before they get applied, we decrypt them. And the problem is that some secrets are not part of a single file or a single environment file that you can use a secret generator or config map generator. There is this use case that Yuri is not the first one that has bring it to my attention, is that maybe you have a Helm values file, which is gigantic, and some things in the values are secrets, some other things are not. Some secrets are managed in those values are managed by different teams, and so on. So the gist of it all is that you need to split these secret values into multiple files, right? And what the current solution and how people can do it today is you create multiple secrets generator or multiple Kubernetes secrets. You encrypt each one of those, you put them all into the Git repo. Flux customized controller decrypts them in memory, applies them on the cluster. Then you refer all these values with values from in the Helm release. So you have multiple entries there and multiple secrets in the cluster. Now, this works for some things, but my understanding is that when you deploy things to multiple clusters, there is the case where you want to use customized overlay and change the secrets based on the cluster, some part in the secret, not the whole thing. It doesn't work to just switch from one Kubernetes secret YAML file to another one. You want to patch an existing Kubernetes secret or a config map, whatever, which is then passed to Helm. And the pull request that I linked that Yuri opened does two things. It decrypts patches before they get applied, before they get merged by customized, in the same way we do now for N files or any other file referenced in the secret generator or config map generator. So we basically discover all the overlays in all the customized configs. We look up the file path, we go to the file, we decrypt it on disk. So when customized does a build, in the same way that it finds an M file decrypted, so it can do the right thing, in the same way it does for patches, which I think it's not that CPU intensive or whatever. We are just expanding the config generator to patches, which should be, let's say, of a reasonable size. You wouldn't have thousands, millions of patches in hopefully in a Git repo. So that's one thing that pull request does. Another thing, which is, in my opinion, quite impactful, and we can discuss it, but I'm really against having this merged, is going over all the reference resources. So you go over all the resources entries in customization, and you check if any resource is encrypted, and you also decrypt it. So my suggestion would be for this pull request to be modified where we only decrypt patches, and we should be documenting the workaround if you need to patch things in a secret. You keep the string data empty in the resource, you don't specify anything there, and you move everything into patches. Patches get decrypted, they get merged, and there is no issue with applying that on the cluster. Yuri, can you say if I captured the whole thing correctly?
Yep, it's completely right. And why I've also added decryption of resources as well as patches is because it happens when part of file is encrypted, and SOPs looking on its metadata fields it adds to the document, and one of them is encrypted regex. It uses that regular expression to locate keys that should be decrypted. And if your patches add any keys that matches that regex, SOPs will try to decrypt them as well, but they are in plain text. So that's why decryption will fail at the very last step. Anyway, Stefan's suggestion to decrypt only patches, that's good enough because we will be able to move all secrets to patches and no issue will be left. So I'm good with that.
Yeah, another thing that I know you are saying that, oh, this is not a SOPs issue or a SOPs bug because it matches the regex that you've set. So if you set regex, decrypt all entries into data, it will go and try to decrypt every single line in data. But in my opinion, this is, let's say, not a bug, but this could be an improvement to SOPs. SOPs should be able to check before it decrypts an entry, a YAML entry, if the entry is encrypted or not, because it's very obvious it's encrypted because it has a unique marker that SOPs adds to all the encrypted values. So it could easily do a checkup. Oh, is this thing encrypted by me? No, skip it, right? So that could definitely be an option in SOPs upstream in the library or something like that we could set in Flux. Ignore, instead of blowing out, ignore the keys that are already decrypted because decryption happened at a different stage, and only look for things which are currently encrypted and try to decrypt those. I'm not sure if SOPs will accept such a change, but I think the right way forward with this is you rebase your pull request, you only do the patch decryption there. Also, thank you very much for rewriting all the tests. They look really nice now. It was really messy. So we can get that shipped in the next Flux version. And in parallel, you could open an issue in SOPs explaining our use case. Hey, we have this use case. It will be nice to have some kind of flag when you do SOPs decryption. That's some boolean in the SDK where you can say ignore decrypted entries, right? And that doesn't mean it has to change the default behavior of the SOP CLI, right? But it offers us a way, as we use it as an SDK, to turn on this new behavior that will help your use case. And then there is basically no issue that you encrypt the base secret with a key. Then patches are encrypted with different keys. We decrypt them. Customize merges them, and then SOPs, if it knows how to ignore the plain text ones, it will use the key that the original file was encrypted, and that should work in memory. And for this to work, we don't need to look at the resources at all, right? Because Flux already does that just before the apply in memory decryption. So yeah, that's my current proposal. Try to work with the SOPs team and solve this fully. But in the current pull request, I suggest you also add a section to the documentation. So because you know about this use case, everybody that's here in the meeting knows, but we should tell everybody, hey, now we have this new use case that you can use. The thing is, you actually need to move everything in patches, and we should write a short thing in the docs, in the API docs under decryption, how you can accomplish this. Okay.
Should I close this one and open the new MR, or just update this merge request removing resources decryption?
I would just update this one.
Update. Okay.
Sunny, anyone, any concerns here with the suggested approach to only look at patches?
I don't have much context around this now. I have to research and then I can have an opinion. No, nothing.
Okay. Cool. Okay, we can move to the next thing I have. So it's now a closed pull request. Someone was trying to add back the suspended metric to helm controller. And so we have deprecated the per resource metrics in, I think, Flux 2.1, right? Sunny, I think was 2.1.
I think we did it in stages, depending on how you're refactoring things.
No, I mean, when we first documented and tell people, hey, this is deprecated.
I don't know the exact version. We did something. Must be in the docs.
Yes, one second. I think I had a note on this. Yes, so it was in 2.1 and now we are at 2.4. What I propose is to create an issue for removing all the deprecated metrics from every single controller. I'm going to add this to the roadmap for 2.5, and we ship this in 2.5 because that person has a good point. Like, why was it removed from helm controller and all the others have it? And the explanation is we kind of missed this big time. When we removed it from helm controller in 2.3, we should have removed it from everywhere, because when we deprecated, we said we are giving people 6 months to move to the new metrics, and now it's more than 1 year have passed. So it was an overlook from our side. We should have done it consistently everywhere, not only in helm controller. But yeah, this is the case now. Sunny, could you do this? Create an issue for removing it, and then we can split the work between us, and this should be straightforward, right? It's about deleting code mostly, so it shouldn't be hard to implement. And yeah, I'm adding to the roadmap, and we can add in our right in the roadmap. This is kind of a breaking change, but given the fact that we deprecated more than 1 year ago, it is now time to fully remove all the metrics. The 3 metrics that were deprecated.
Duration we need 3. Suspend and readiness we don't need. Duration
What?
is the runtime. Duration is the runtime metric which we need to export. but readiness and suspend are not runtime.
Yeah,
we
no.
removed the two.
So we remove condition and suspended status. Like what we documented here, basically. Let me give it a link. So this is the link to the docs, and in the docs we say users are deprecating metrics, reconcile condition, and suspend status can find the same information in the new metric. So we need to remove only these two
I was looking in
because
the
this is what we deprecated.
source controller code, and I see there's readiness metric as well in source controller. Okay, we'll remove that as well.
Yeah, for
That's
sure. Wait, readiness, the readiness one is not condition? Does not
I
translate
think it's
to...
condition.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so
It's just called something. Right? It is a condition.
yeah, but it's the same stuff. I mean, what we wrote in the docs. And I also check customized controller, image reflector controller. Everyone besides Helm controller have the old metrics, right? So I can understand if they didn't update it, they didn't read the change log, then they updated Flux, and they realized, oh, we no longer see that Helm release is suspended, right? I'm guessing tons of users are in this situation, but it's nothing we can do. We wrote in the release back then, hey, these metrics are deprecated. Now we are going to remove them and link again to the new monitoring, to the existing monitoring docs. Hey, you should move to this. And we also need to update the docs and say, these are deprecated and removed, right? Cool, okay. I'm done with my items. We can move to other things.
All right. So we have another bout. So, Stefan, you weren't here last time. I don't know if you read the discussion by any chance or
Yes.
saw. Excellent.
Yeah.
That makes it so much easier. So, as a quick like summary, what we really would like to achieve is to watch artifacts instead of to watch also artifacts and the artifact object being promoted to a CRD, so we can watch it, and that basically makes for any kind of source to be accepted by the Helm and the customized controller, and that makes for an extendable way of having any kind of object that produces an artifact be a Flux provider, like source provider. So I extended the discussion, like I added a couple of things. After the last discussion, there were certain points made by Kingdom and Sunny as well. For example, that it might be a maintenance nightmare to do this because there might be more issues now. People use their own source, and the maintainers need to understand like where is this coming from. Our suggestion in that case was that you don't necessarily, because all you care about is the artifact, and you can tell people who come to you that, hey, I'm using this source. What is happening? Why isn't it working? You can just tell them, is it producing an artifact? Well, no. Then please read the relevant documentation here. So obviously we would need to write very relevant and very detailed documentation about how to go about this, like how to use it. The other concern was that there are not many use cases in that regard. We actually had like one other person commenting that that this would be nice to have, and and without requiring explicit support, yeah, from other side. They didn't reply with an actual use case, sadly. So there goes that. But other than that, we still need to gather a bunch of stuff. I was at KubeCon last week, so I wasn't able to like properly gather more intel on that. I'll do that as we go forward.
Yeah, I think we really need proper use cases that are not resolvable through OCI artifacts, what we currently have today. So the current solution that people are using, and for example, I'm working on a side project called Timony, which is something like having that packages apps and all the definitions are not YAML, are in Qlang, which is something that Flux does not understand. How people are using this is through running the transformation, the templating, everything with Timony in the same way as you would run Helm template or whatever. Then
Yeah,
you
I know
pipe the
Timony.
result to Flux push,
Mm-hmm.
and then you don't need to run expensive transformations inside the cluster. I don't think that's the right way to do it. You obviously think it is, but so the current solution is you can run this type of transformations outside the cluster in your CI pipeline or whatever. You pipe them to the Flux push command, and then inside the cluster, everywhere you consolidate over the OCI repository source type. So what my vision of a future Flux is where we go the opposite way. We consolidate everything over OCI. And there is a very nice project inside CNCF, which is called the ZOT registry, which can act as a proxy throughout out of the cluster. It caches OCI artifacts from various other registries, and it's very lightweight. It could, for example, be run as a sidecar to source controller. And you can, if we are going on that direction, you can actually run the transformation in cluster with your own logic, and then you would push the result to the source controller sidecar, which is ZOD, and then source controller and provision an OCI repo, right? So instead of modifying all the API, you would build a third-party controller that just generates OCI repository objects and does the transformation and push to that registry. So I'm looking for, I'm not saying no to your proposal. What I'm looking for is a motivation of why using an in-cluster registry like Zod is not sufficient, and why we need to allow the reconcilers to look for, artifacts created by third party. What's the difference between creating a artifact custom resource from your custom controller versus your custom controller could push to the in-cluster registry and create an OCI repository? What's the advantage of the two, right? I see no advantages of.
Well, the first advantage, the first obvious advantage is that you don't need to maintain the registry. I mean, I understand that Zot is simple, but why would I need an extra component if I already have Flux that can take care of all of that? Like maintaining an in-cluster registry, which we did for now do, and also the Docker registry isn't that big. It was kind of like easy to run it, but actually it provided more problems than it solved. Like, for example, it being HTTPS, we created it as an HTTPS repository because of course we don't want any security problems with that stuff. But we also needed to support it running HTTP, and that's like some complexity overhead. The whole deployment was a bit more complex because you need to create this environment, you need to create Zot, you need to add it, you need to maintain it, you need to run it and properly configure it, and then keep up with updates for it. We already do that for Flux. Increases the packaging because we need to like, deploy it, because everything needs to work with it. Like the whole thing needs to work together with Zotan or whatever the registry you chose to run. And then
Yeah,
you had
no.
some
My
problems with
suggestion
Han
will
as
be
well.
wait a second. My suggestion here is for Zod to be integrated into Flux. So we will take care of running it as a side container and everything, right? It will be a
Oh,
flag, it will be a component. When you do a bootstrap, you'll have the in-cluster registry, which will be run as a sidecar in source controller. So you'll be using the source controller service and everything. Also, source controller is HTTP. So if you have the problem with
yeah.
Zod, you'll have the same problem with source control. That's why I'm saying running it as a sidecar and making it part of source controller as it is. And another thing is that source controller currently stores on disk
Yes.
on
Yeah.
all the artifacts. We call them Flux artifacts. What are
Yes.
these Flux artifacts? Are a one-on-one with OCI artifacts. It's the
Yeah.
exact same
Yeah.
format. So why would we keep doing this and not remove completely the storage responsibility from source controller? And source controller will use a proper OCI registry as its storage, and that will be the Zod sidecar, right? So you will not have duplicate artifacts. Source controller will no longer have to manage artifacts at all, their storage, their persistence, and so on. And why I'm thinking about this is that our implementation of the source controller storage is not OCI compliant. As in, if there are three artifacts which are identical in source controller storage, they are kept 3 times, right? We don't use the OCI format, the overlay format, where
Yeah,
the
the
overlay
layers.
format will say, oh, we don't need to store this at all. You just have a pointer to the already stored version, right? So I'm thinking more than just running as a sidecar, as in using the overlay storage for source controller storage, which will tremendously reduce the amount of duplicates we have. And you may think, why are duplicates? And for example, with multi-tenancy, right? When you enable Flux multi-tenancy, you can't share Flux sources across namespaces.
Yeah.
And what I've seen in practice is that there is some repo out there, every tenant needs it. So that repo gets stored for every single namespace in source controller storage, right? And that repo is big or can be big, right? And we basically, not making use of a container registry storage system means that we duplicate all this information. Now, if we would have used something very lightweight, Zod wasn't around when, for example, when we designed Flux version 2, and Docker container registry was V2 alpha something. And V1 didn't support the OCI. So we thought about it back then a little bit, then we decided, no, this is the ecosystem is not ready for this, and we are not going to build our own registry. Let's just go with simple, on disk storage, and we just keep the format of the files, the tars in the same way a registry will keep it, but without using a registry effectively, right? But now things have evolved a lot, right? And we could actually get rid of the Flux storage, which is not as performant, not as smart as a registry. Use an actual registry in there that can also other controllers, transformers could write to it. Source controller writes to it and reads from it and serves everything that's there to everybody else. All right, so that's where I think we need to put in balance, like changing the APIs, creating this artifact object, which as it is right now, I'm not saying no to it, but what I'm saying is we need to promote all the current Flux APIs to GA before we can introduce a new API object. In source controller, we still have OCI repository, which is in beta, and image automation is still in beta, and notification. So on the roadmap, we still have many months to go to, consolidate the current API, the current implementation, and ship, and give Flux users what they really want. Is like stability and how Flux looks today before we do any more major structural changes. And your suggestion is a major structural change because it touches the
Why?
reconcilers, which are GA, right?
Well, no, I mean it touches a switch statement. That's all it does. Like
For
in the
example,
Helm and the customized controllers, it just touches what it watches, like the switch statement where it gets the artifact from.
Okay, forget the code. I mean, what users are doing, right? We have a custom resource definition, and right now the source ref is restricted to, for example, in the customized API, which is GA, is restricted to only 3 options. You can only have 3 things in there, right?
Yeah.
So we are making a breaking change to the API in a way that we currently remove the current restrictions that we have, right? And we introduce, people can add there whatever.
No. It's just one. You add the artifact. You don't break the current API. You just add artifact in there.
No, actually, as we proposed it, you could add anything in the source ref that is pointed to by an artifact.
Yeah, that's how I understand it, right? So this type of, we now it's free for all. This type of change to me is we need to bump the API version. It can't be V1 anymore because we currently remove a restriction that's already in there. It's like, imagine if Kubernetes deployment would say, oh, instead of secret ref and config ref that you can mount in a pod, now you can mount custom resource definitions. I expect for the pod ref, for the pod spec, to have a new version because this is completely changes the security profile and the scope of the API, right? If we allow any kind of source, right? How would that work for multi-tenancy? How the cluster admin say, oh, but we don't want some tenant to use random sources. We only want to use the normal sources, right? So they will need to use Kyverno or something like that because our API no longer allows everything, right? So it also complicates the security. I mean, it changes completely the security representation of the Flux APIs. We also need to generate artifacts. Where even is the artifact TRD? Which controller owns it? So how we have it right now, every single controller owns their APIs. Like this artifact type, who owns it? It's under which controller? Source, right? Or it comes out of nowhere. It's source
It would
controller.
either be in source or package APIs, or that you have the conditions under.
Okay, but then we need to completely change the Flux distribution because the Flux distribution is based upon the fact that every single controller owns their CRDs and they are versioned together with that controller. It's part of the API. We have a very strict versioning scheme, right? Introducing this API, which is not owned by anybody, shared by all, right? Because source controller will depend on it. I don't know, all the others will depend on it. Like Helm controller has to depend on it. Customized controller, and we can't just remove the dependency to source controller because if we want to maintain backwards compatibility, we still have to watch Git repo objects and so on.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm saying like you've presented RFC in a way that, oh, this can be implemented and there are no changes, visible changes to Flux. While what I'm saying is that these changes are quite consistent to how we distribute Flux, how we secure Flux, how we think of Flux in multi-tenancy setup and so on. It basically changes the security aspect of Flux, where we basically validate and we only watch for these specific source types. And another thing, we validate the integrity of the artifact. What happens with the integrity validation?
So in that case, what Sunny and Kingdom actually mentioned on a previous occasion could help if we are flexible as well with the RFC that we want, and we don't say, okay, whatever can be a source, but we say, let's say only an artifact can be a source, like I said earlier. Misspoke earlier, but actually might be better, because then you, that was a Kingdom suggestion, like why not just add artifact as a source type? Because then, okay, the usability, like the user flow that we were going with, isn't that nice, saying, okay, whatever you want can be an artifact, can be a source type, but it still would work in our favor if we have a way to consistently produce artifact object names, like a reproducible artifact object names, because normally artifacts are in the background, but fine, we can be flexible. And that would solve your problem of being arbitrary security integration, whatever the word is, that you can define arbitrary sources. You wouldn't be able to. You still add the 3 + 1 artifact. And in that case, the integrated stays. The source controller would own the artifact as it does right now, just promoted to a CRD type. What do you think about that?
Yeah, but still, source controller not create artifacts custom resources, or at least not in Flux version 2. We need Flux version 3 for that.
I mean, source controller wouldn't create those, like that would stay the same, but anything could create it and then make it a source, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's doable for us to say we are expanding the source ref in Flux customization with a new type. So we have the 3 types. We add a 4th one. We don't remove whatever we have right now. We just extend it and say, besides OCI repo, Git repo, bucket, we also have artifact.
Yeah.
We have a watcher on artifact. In that switch, there is a 4th item in the switch, which looks for artifacts. It creates a watcher for artifacts. Source controller is not modified at all. Just the fact that source controller APIs, CRDs, are extended with the new custom resource definition artifact, which here is, anyway, it's the only place we can assign ownership to. So it will be under source.toolkit flux.io kind artifact, but source controller will not generate artifact custom resources. It will do what it does today. Other controllers can create artifacts custom resources. You can change, let's say, a Flux customization to have its source ref pointing to an artifact. But all the producers of this artifact have to subscribe to our algorithms for consistency verification.
Yeah.
What we could do is, so before we start all of this, we need to move some parts of how the storage part, some parts of the storage part in source controller into package and make a public package for others to consume. that allows them to create the digest, the Flux artifact digest with the same algorithm that we have a bunch of algorithms that you can use there. Some hashing algorithms are faster than others. We have a lot of production usage switching from the default algorithm. So basically, we need to have this public function, a package, a dedicated package in FluxCD package that takes whatever, a directory, and creates the tar with the same format and with the same hashing algorithm as source control, right? So that we can ensure that whatever third-party controller you have, it will generate a status in the artifact object with the same hashing algorithms, with the same and the payload that customize and handle controller will get has the same format. It's the same tar with the same options, tar gzip with the same options, same algorithm. Right? So this I think can work. It's a lot of work, but it's less impactful on Flux users or the security stance that we currently have. I think it's acceptable to say we are extending the V1 APIs with the new source type, which is this generic artifact. And the goal of this are third-party integrations. It's not Flux. Flux has its own sources. But if you need third-party integrations, for whatever reason, maybe you want to do, Timony build or Helm template or whatever inside the cluster, then your controller can issue an artifact custom resource. And you said that you want to promote the artifact type as it is as a custom resource. I'm not sure I would do that. All the fields. I think it should still be in status. Things like checksum, revision, and so on. A controller shouldn't update spec fields. It should update status fields. So the artifact can't just be taken as it is and made it into a spec PRD. I think maybe the spec will be empty, or I don't know what we'll have in spec. I don't know. We need to think about it. But I think the fields as they are, they should be in status because they change all the time, right? If you produce a new artifact revision, the revision, the checksum should be in the status, not in the spec, because status is what the controller is responsible for.
Can I provide one example? So after discussing this 2 weeks ago, I went through the RFC and code to understand why I felt it unnecessary to have the owner reference part. I was saying, why do we need it? We were saying because how Flux references sources today, you want to keep that, so you have this. And it felt wrong to me. Later, I realized why it felt wrong to me. Because I have seen this way of working in Cert Manager. In Cert Manager, you create a certificate issuer, and then you create a certificate signing request. And to both of them, you give a name of the secret. So the consumer of the certificate will look for the secret, and the producer will create that secret. We can have a similar model here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the owner ref, it's up to the third-party controller. If the third-party controller wants to add an owner ref to the artifact, so when its custom resource gets deleted, the artifact object gets deleted.
No. That's another thing. This owner ref is not Kubernetes owner ref. This is a map in the cache, client cache, which has a name and the artifact, name of the source and artifact connection. It's not Kubernetes owner reference.
Oh, okay.
It's just a term.
Okay, but what we are discussing now to allow the artifact type to be specified in the ref, we don't change anything. We just add a new watcher. So all that stuff is done, right?
Yeah.
It
Not
simplifies
really.
a lot the implementation in handle controller and customized controller, because we say, oh, we are now watching for kind artifact. And if it's an artifact in that switch, we run the same code as we run today, right? We discover the URL where the artifact is in the status, we download it, we use the algorithm to verify the consistency like before, and we do all things like before. We don't actually, the changes to handle controller and customized controller will be extremely minimum. A new watcher for a new kind, and we expect the status to be identical to what we have today. All the fields should be in there. So it's really minimal code. And yes, we allow anyone to ship their own source producers, artifacts producers, however you want to call it. This can also work. How I imagine it, I mean, a real use case of this is, how I imagine it is like, your third-party controller will not go outside the cluster at all. You will have, let's say, a Git repo that pulls the Timony definitions, which is all QLang. Then you have this Timony controller, and it's in its custom resource, it has a reference to the Git repo. It goes to source controller, gets the Q code, does its magic, which transforms whatever is Q into YAMLs, and then it produces the artifact in its storage or whatever it is. Then it updates the artifact custom resource, or it creates a new custom resource altogether with the same name as, some convention, the same name as its own custom resource. And it has all the things in there, and that's YAML that serves customized controller. Customized controller applies the whole thing, and it has no way of knowing, oh, this was Q or whatever. It's just YAML, right? And
that's a good use case.
Also, we give people that are developing these third-party controllers flexibility. It's up to them what naming convention they want to decide, so the end user will know what to put in the artifact name in there. Right. I think a good and a natural convention will be if the Timony transformer is named podinfo, the artifact that's resulting is in the same namespace and is named podinfo. And using this simple convention, people have no doubt what are we going to add in source ref, right? Because in your initial proposal was, in source ref, the kind could be whatever custom resource out there, and you put that name in. But if we tell people, hey, the convention is, you don't put the kind of your custom resource or whatever, the kind is artifact, but the name equals whatever your custom resource is named, then I think we offer people a good solution. So it's not confusing, it's obvious, and we recommend the third-party controller developers to use this convention to simplify the usage everywhere, right? It's use the same name. In any case, the artifact
I would
to
put
be in the same
kind in
namespace.
front of it as well. I would put the custom resource kind in front of it as well as a lowercase, because it could be that there's the same name, something else, like a different kind, but with the same name. But whatever,
Sure.
we can,
Sure. I mean, it's up to
whatever it is,
whatever it is, as long as the end user, the Flux end user, has a way to either set the artifact name in that third-party custom resource or know some conventions, and they can set the right thing in the Flux customization or hem list, I think is fine. I also don't think, while I understand this use case for customized controller, I'm having a very hard time understanding this use case for Helm controller. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because Helm controller is a transformer on its own. It doesn't accept random OCI artifacts. They need to be Helm OCI artifacts, which have a special magic numbers in the target. the content of the artifact has to be a Helm chart, has to have all the structure of the Helm chart. So who is that third-party controller which would generate charts? I mean, why would we need to have artifact as a source ref in a Helm release? I can't right now, I can't imagine a use case where you generate on the fly inside the cluster charts, Helm charts. Because Helm
Well,
charts come from an OCI registry, right? That's the way Helm works.
Helm
Like,
charts. Well, yes and no. I mean, you can also download Helm charts as a tar. And then you untar that, you customize some stuff or do with it some stuff, you retar it, tar it, and then send it off to Helm controller, which understands that stuff.
yeah, but what's the use case? Because Helm controller exposes all the things that you could do with the chart. You can also customize anything which is inside the chart, because the Helm release has a customization option, the pause build customize, where you can change whatever. So why wouldn't you use the current API that everybody uses when they want to change something which is outside the chart? Why would you need to untar it, make some changes inside, retar it, and then expose the artifact?
So there are cases where, for example, we are generating a chart. So like we already did something to somewhere, but there was no chart yet, and then we generated a chart and we fired that off to the Helm controller to deploy that. That doesn't necessarily come from an OCI registry or anything like that. It just is in an artifact. And the other reason is it's not always like there is an so kind of source agnostic way to do the configuration or the changes, in which case you just define some value somewhere and then you do some transformations on it, whether it's a chart or something else, not always apparent. And then you fire it off again, have an artifact, and the end process creates a chart of it or whatever, and then it's a chart at that point, and then it gets deployed by Helm controller. In some cases, sure, if we already know what to do, we can use the controller to transform it, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, okay.
Also,
In 7 years of Flux, I never heard anyone coming up with this request. So you are making things up. I mean, I really want to see an actual use case.
yeah,
We can imagine all sorts of things, like Flux should fly on the moon and go back because we need it. But
Oh, wait,
yeah.
Fabian has a good one. Sure.
yeah, we wanted to add more background on what our use case is throughout the next several days. But essentially, we didn't only want to be able to do transformations. Actually, that wasn't even our primary use case. We just wanted to plug our custom source or the delivery system into Flux without having to do a transformation in one of the existing source types.
Okay, and you are producing what, YAMLs or charts?
We just have another way to access our blobs independent of the technology where they are stored, and version our blobs, which can be arbitrary artifacts, but among them Helm charts or customizations, and we retrieve them using our custom library, and that library kind of abstracts away where the thing was actually stored. So just a random made-up example, we could store our Helm chart in a Maven repository, and you wouldn't actually notice, but we could provide you the artifact in the cluster as a tar GZ and then use it as a custom, as a source for the Helm controller.
Okay.
That's essentially the use case we have for that. not primarily the transformation part. Although that would be a neat side. I think that would be a neat side effect, just because it would enable like these pipes and filter pattern within Kubernetes. But you already mentioned you're not really a fan of that, or you're not really a fan of doing in cluster transformations. But yeah, that
Yeah,
would be.
I mean,
yeah.
there are. I think there is in my mind, there is a well-defined line between what you should be running in production and what you shouldn't. And transformation, if it's possible to run it outside the cluster, you should definitely run it outside the cluster, because usually it means execing to some binary, right? And all of a sudden you have binaries which are running in your production cluster next to your production workloads. And all of a sudden, those binaries are now part of your production system. You should be looking at CVEs. What vulnerabilities? Can that binary do something to the cluster because it runs under a particular service account, right? So it basically, it broadens up the whole attack surface of a production cluster. It's like running Jenkins in your production system in a way, right? It automatically can run whatever. So that's in principle, I think bringing transformation and stuff that you could easily do in CI in your production cluster just because you find it easier, I think it makes the whole security profile of your production system way more complicated. So it simplifies some stuff, but then when it really hurts, where someone gets into your production system and your corporate data ends up on the internet, is like that chance amplifies the more stuff you run in the cluster, in the production cluster. You don't actually have to do it. You have to run the Flux suppliers in the cluster because they need to talk to Kubernetes API. But transforming some YAML into another YAML that doesn't need Kubernetes access, so why the hell would you run it in the cluster? That's my thinking. But I'm not discarding your use case. It's not everybody is concerned about security and so on. Like maybe you run I don't know, public services on
that's
the
rough.
cluster, and you don't care about the data.
But like I've listened to this discussion for quite some time now, and I feel like it's not really consistent, because even the post renderers are something that is in the GA API and that I would never consider for production installation. Like think about a random customized patch that you inject into a Helm release or whatever, right? I mean, you're right. There are considerations to be made, but I'm saying the line is maybe not as clear as we make it out to be sometimes, right?
Yeah, but you're right about
everything.
the fact that,
Everything you said basically is something that is valid, but it's also something we can still do with Flux as it is right now, right? I think the power is probably with the landscape engineers, right? Like the SREs and the people who actually use and deploy Flux on a day-to-day basis. Of course, they can fuck things up, right? Of course, they cannot follow the best practice. But so, in my opinion, it's the same with footprint discussion on the runtime of the source. So if you let's take the example from Fabian with the Maven repository, or let's take it some other repository type. I really don't care. Ultimately, the repository needs to be accessed in a way that's secure. That's of course clear, right? But what's also important is that the deployer needs to be able to deal with it. I think the proposal mainly deals with, okay, how can the deployer access that repository? Of course, the discussion around how to make that actual deployment then secure it's a valid discussion, right? But it's not something that the proposal inherently opinionates on, right? It's not like we're saying, okay, by default, all the
Well,
artifacts are insecure.
I think you're sort of right in a way. Flux already supports as a Helm source, S3 buckets, and Git repositories. From a security perspective, the post-render customization is a feature that Helm exposed before Flux designed this feature, and Flux is one of the only ways you can actually really use it. I celebrate these features, but also as a support person who has to deal with the people who come into the channel, I curse them because every time we have one now. This morning, someone came in with an issue with their Helm chart that comes from a Git repository, and I frankly don't know if it is the problem that they haven't set the revision strategy or if it is a completely other issue, because there are so many different ways. So combinatorial explosion of more ways is something I am very cautious about.
Yeah, I mean, definitely adding this generic artifact thing will bring a lot of pain to us. It's unavoidable. We'll
But you
have
are
to
already
deal with all the sources. Like people say, oh, Flux is not working, customized controller is failing. Well, it's not customized controller. Look at the artifact status. There is no artifact status. Okay, what is the third-party controller log look like, and so on, right? So, every feature we add to Flux, it adds, of course, tremendous pressure on a very small team of people that have to do this free support stuff, right? It's unavoidable. Like I'm going to give you another example, which is completely unrelated to the APIs. We decided, hey, because we are not going to re-implement Istio into Flux and have MTLS and rotating secrets and sets and everything, we are going to ship Flux with the network policy that seals off Flux namespace to only the Flux controllers, and only them are allowed to talk between them. And because we want people to run Flux securely, we are going to enable by default the network policies that we wrote, which are very strict, on the default installation. And we did that. The consequence of my decision back then is horrible. Like, we are dealing with every single time someone creates a cluster and the CNI is broken, how they detected it because Flux is deployed immediately after the cluster creation, Flux fails. So I know all the bugs in Cilium. I know all the bugs in all the CNIs out there because they were reported on the Flux channel. And everybody was yelling at us, Flux is broken. Customized controller cannot talk to source controller, or source controller cannot reach to GitHub, right? And all of the sudden, we had to do support. We have to debug, oh, what's in the logs, what's in core DNS, what are the CNI logs, and so on, right? So you can easily dismiss us and say, oh, if it's an artifact, you just tell people to talk to the third-party controller. But this will not happen. We will have to be the first line of support. Then we'll have to, guide the user. Hey, maybe talk to the third-party controller developer because I'm certain the issue is there, right? So
I mean,
it's
on
unavoidable.
This is another
on
thing
that note, on that note, I just wanted to ask, like, what's like, what I hear is pain in the debugging story when you're dealing with artifact fetching, and I do understand that pain, but that pain, as you just mentioned yourself, is there right now, and I would much rather maybe advocate for I guess the developer experience to ease up than by being able to give the developers or the support channels a utility to debug this better. Because ultimately, even if we reject this entire proposal, all of these categories of bugs still exist, right? So I'm wondering, I mean, you're definitely right, and I think you kind of hit the nail right on, directly into the deepest wounds you have as every kind of open source maintainer, right? I have the same problem with LVM and Tupo LVM. It's shit, right? But ultimately, the only answer I can give here is we probably need to think about how we can make the debug story easier, right? For all kinds of artifact fetching.
Of course, and we actually have a bunch of commands in the Flux CLI to debug all the things. No one runs them, no one reads the docs. Everybody goes on Slack and says,
yeah.
And then I have to,
Cilium.
paste the docs to, hey, this is how you look at the status. This is how you look at the Helm chart status. This is how you look at the Git repository status.
I'm glad you
But
brought
we-
up the
There
CNI.
was a Slack channel. I didn't know.
But we already have an artifact. So the artifact should not be something unfamiliar to Flux users. Like, the artifact is something that
They
has
are not
already been
aware of it.
used.
They are not aware of it at all.
I mean, you're
anyway,
right on
if
this.
we
The artifact is public API at that point going forward. I understand the concern, right? I think we shouldn't discuss it away, as you said. The
Mhm.
question is, how can we make it so that the impact on the Flux maintainership is as little as possible when it comes to actually
So-
debugging a failed artifact?
First of all, we need to add to the Flux CLI commands all the commands that we currently support for our sources. It should also work for the artifact. You should be able to list artifacts, to look at their status, to streamline all the events that third-party controllers attach to an artifact, to streamline them in the CLI like they do today with, I don't know, Flux events, tail, Git repository, podinfo, and they see all the events that source controller generates for that particular source, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only about, if we implement this proposal, it's not only about adding artifact to customize and Helm controller, adding the switch. We need to build all the things in the CLI, all the observability things that we currently have in the CLI, the debugging features. We need to extend them and have Flux get source artifact, Flux, tail events kind artifact, Flux trace artifact, everything, all the commands. We have like, I don't know, hundreds of commands. Someone needs to implement all these
I
commands.
mean, like
for
I would
the artifact type.
I would argument you would need that anyways right now for the Git repository and the OCI registry.
They are there. That's what I'm
I
saying.
mean, you have them on the source level, but you don't have them on the artifact level. That's the issues you have. You can't see inside. You can only look inside the source controller.
So when you look at the Git repo, what we show to people I can tell you are not using the CLI. What we actually show in the output of the CLI are data from the artifact, the revision, any errors that happened during, I don't know, the artifact bundling or whatever, right? It's all about the artifact. Of course, that's how the CLI is built, right?
Yeah, but
So
what I'm
So it's
saying is
already
you look
there
actually.
then.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. Yeah. So I mean, it's not hard to rebuild the functionality on something that you already use anyway, just through an indirection, right? I mean, but you're right. I mean, I'm not dismissing the fact that we need to do it. I'm just saying that this is stuff that we already have, and it's really something that is currently specifically built for these CRs, but it's really something that's based on the artifact, right? So technically, we would need to do this all on artifact level.
Yeah, like all the commands that there are specific commands under the subcommand source.
Yeah.
And you have now source Git, source Helm, source chart, source bucket. Has to be source artifact.
Yeah, but that's basically
have all the things.
Copy and paste.
Or not necessarily copy and paste. Like we use the
Because
same.
it's artifact inside as well. So it uses the same artifact, just named
It would call the functions that you already have in the CLI. But what I'm saying is that to ship this feature, we need to extend the CLI to help people debug. And
of course,
even if people don't know about it, to help us when we do support, to tell them, hey, you should be running this Flux command to figure out what's wrong with the artifact, right? But it will be a more complicated for them to figure out what's going on, because in the Flux native sources, the artifact and the source are one object. So the command will tell you everything, the configuration and the artifact. In the case of third-party controllers, they can look up the artifact with the Flux CLI commands, but then the controller developer has to also offer their own CLIs or whatever to be able to, look at the specifics of how this artifact was created, and it's their responsibility to do that, right? But from a user perspective, it's a two-step thing. You look at the artifact, then you decide, okay, the artifact is actually broken, and that's the reason. Now I have to look up in the, I don't know, third-party controller logs, events, custom resource status, and so on to figure out what's the reason of this error that I have now in the artifact, right? So it's a two-step debugging experience and so on.
But I think that's completely fine. Like the artifact itself promotes being generic. So if you are using an artifact, you already know that whatever the source is not Flux. So you will naturally be using the third party
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think
That's
that
why
works out
I'm
nicely.
that's why I'm all for not modifying source controller at all,
Yes.
because then people know, oh, if there is if the source ref is artifact, then that's definitely not Flux,
Yes.
because source controller never create this artifact thing, right?
Yes.
So you need to look, by default, you need to look to whoever made the artifact is not Flux, so you need to look there, right? So I think the separation is very obvious from the API. And when we do support, if we see a source ref artifact, then we can actually instantly tell the people, hey, this is not, if the artifact is not there, you need to use the debugging tools beyond Flux, because that's
Exactly
100% of the reason is there why the artifact is not created. It's not because source controller, right?
Exactly.
Even
That's
if
why we think it's not that like huge plus extra burden on the Flux debuggers, Flux maintainers. Sorry.
It will. It really depends on also what type of transformers will be built, what people will be doing with this.
Yeah, but that's their concern at that point.
I mean, I do understand the point. Let's imagine we have an artifact and then they have the artifact there and then they want to use it in a Helm release and suddenly their customized post transformer stops working and they wonder why it's happening because the artifact did not get resolved correctly. So of course there can be bugs that happen based on the artifact type. I agree. But I see it similarly to Stefan, right? Like ultimately, at that point where you see artifact in any of these source refs, you have a clear indicator for any kind of support case to say, please take a look at your artifact and make sure that it's working fine. And that you can only do with the proper CLI commands, right? So I think there can be made a support story that is defendable. I personally, to be honest, still think that's the same with the owner reference indirection, but I'm not married to this, right? I'm saying either way, it will probably work out, and we can probably, together with the proper CLI commands, make it supportable for everyone that wants to take up support duty in Flux. I think this is the major takeaway from this discussion, right? That it's hard, but it can be done. At least that's my takeaway, right? And then the only question that's left is for me at least, do we want it, right? That is, I guess, remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think the next step will be for the RFC to be rewritten how we discussed today, where we explicitly say, hey, how is Flux changing? Source controller will add the new custom resource definition called artifact, which is specifically made for third-party controllers. Flux does not uses it, and only customized the Helm controller needs to be modified with watches for the artifact, and detail what the conclusion we have today, and document what changes needs to be done to Flux, because after today's discussion, the changes are way less impactful than what we had before this one, right?
And I'll do the changes on the RFC and the discussion.
Yeah, we also need to in the technical implementation details of the RFC, we need to take into account the work that needs to be done with removing, extracting from source controller the logic that around bundling and generating artifact file, because the customized controller and Helm controller only accept that type of file, anything else. It has to be a target zip. It has to use the same type of hashing and checksum, all that stuff. So that's one part of the work on the controllers. So extracting that from source controller, make it public, modify, customize, and Helm controller to accept source type artifact, add the watcher there, then extend the CLI to be able to allow people to list, tail, whatever, all the commands that usually sources have, they should be extended to the artifact in the same way. So it's It's a little bit of copy paste and reusing all the functions that we currently have implemented in the CLI.
We actually, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We actually already made some of that. The sample HTTP source controller thingy that produces an artifact uses the Flux's storage mechanism to do that. And that artifact has been accepted by the time controller and customized controller as a valid artifact. So
yeah, but you probably
but I
copy
need
pasted
to-
stuff.
Well, the storage mechanism, how it reconciles artifact and how it reconciles the storage. Yeah. I agree. So we know which part has to be like publicly made available for people to use, generate the artifact. So yeah, right.
Just from my understanding, I quickly like to come back to the initial thing with the owner references, because I currently do not completely understand how the attack surface is significantly smaller with this approach, where we only add the artifact to the switch, because ultimately, even with the initial proposal with the owner references, of course you can reference everything, and I understand that's significant for the API, but ultimately the thing you have referenced needs to have generated an artifact too. So essentially exactly the same things can be a source with the owner references as they can be now without the owner references.
I mean, the changes from a Flux security perspective is simple. We only watch for a new type.
Yeah, but that's
watch.
also, but only watching for the artifact type is even the case with the owner references.
We can't watch only for the artifact type. I'm not for source controller to generate artifacts types ever. So I'm not okay with that approach.
So we would.
So customized controller cannot watch only for an artifact type.
Yeah,
and
okay.
accept random sources.
Sorry. That's not what I wanted. I mean, even with the owner reference case, the customized controller would also only have to additionally watch the artifact type.
Like it wouldn't watch arbitrary sources.
It wouldn't watch arbitrary
sources.
Exactly, it wouldn't watch arbitrary or unstructured sources. It would also only watch the artifact type. That's exactly the same thing, even with the owner references.
So
it
what
just
would
would
you
get
add
the
in the source
artifact
ref?
via the owner reference.
Sorry, Stefan, come again.
What would you add in the source ref of the customization?
Yeah, there we would add our custom resource, but just to keep the user experience, and then we would use the owner reference on the artifact we are watching to connect this custom resource mentioned in the source ref with the artifact that has been generated, just to keep the user experience consistent.
The point is
think
that you only need
adding-
to do a list call on the artifacts, and if you do an RBAC as you have it in the default installation, in which you would block, for example, who can create artifacts and whatnot, that would not be impacted by this change.
Yeah, of course. I mean, a controller runs through impersonation, and we have RBAC, which we explicitly enable a controller to read ahead of time known custom resources. So
Yes.
adding artifact means adding one record in the Flux RBAC without changing anything, how we build, how we distribute Flux. It's owned by source controller. Everything will go smoothly if we extend the current rules to add one more custom resource, which is owned by Flux and the Flux team.
Right.
If
and
we
the point,
add random stuff, then you need to rebuild, you need to build your own Flux distribution for every single new custom resource. We are not going to enable that by default.
The point is
that you don't
Right.
need it.
Yeah.
The point is, if you use a client-based watch that uses the indirection through the owner reference, you do not need to add arbitrary watches on source types. That's the point, even if you allow them in your source ref. The watch can still be made fully on the artifact level, even though the actual source ref that you specify with kind API version and group is not the artifact.
I think it
That's
is
the
not
point, because
related.
there are. Yeah, sorry.
This was not related to security. It's just for simplicity. We can just watch one extra thing instead of adding this reference owner reference thing. Just for simplicity, just add one watcher, done. We don't need to do anything else.
Yeah,
I don't think it was security related thing.
That was the point. The point for no, the first discussion we had the last time we talked, that was what you brought up, Sunny, and I still take that, right? That's still an agreeable point, right? You can argument for simplicity for sure, right? But today the discussion, that was not about simplicity, that was about the user experience for the debugging story, as well as for security concerns around the fact if we accept other source types. And just because we just said what we said doesn't mean that your point is invalid, right? So the point of simplicity still stands, right? If we all vote, it's simpler, it's better to not do this, then that's fine, right? But that's independent of the discussion, okay, what do we need to watch for? I think all we wanted to say is you only need to watch for one source kind, being the artifact, in whichever case. So it should not be made part of the decision because it doesn't change the way the watch is set up.
yeah, that's essentially, yeah, that's what I want to say. Think so.
But it changes the way the custom resource definition restriction work. You need to remove it. You need to allow any kind of string in the source ref. Is no longer an enum.
Yes, so that is still the case. That is
Yes.
true, right? But
And
the
if we
point was
make
about
that
the watch,
change-
right?
Yeah, okay. But if we make that change to the CRD, it can't be customization V1 and hand release V2. It needs to be V2 and V3. It needs to be it's years away, months away, many years away, right?
Let me
So
just
it's up to you if you create an RFC where source ref can be anything. My comment on that RFC will be, it's okay. We need to ship a new major version of these two APIs because we are relaxing this thing to unknown sources, right?
But yeah, I see what you mean, and of course one could implement other restrictions and make it configurable through some other way what actual sources can be referenced there. But I guess your argument still stays. Even
Yeah, of
in
course
that
you
case.
could use Kyverno or whatever, but the whole thing with why we've worked so hard on Flux multi-tenancy and so on was the feedback from users that are saying, we don't want to use third-party stuff. Flux should be able to secure itself, right? And this is the direction we went through, where we kind of lock down all our custom resources. We have multi-tenancy flags. We use service account impersonation. We know exactly what resources Flux can refer and what resources Flux can use, right? And it's very obvious because it's there in the custom resource. You see it, right? And it's not, can't be random stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm for having this artifact type, which is owned by the Flux project and is part of our CRD, and only that thing that we own can be referenced from our custom resources versus reference random custom resources, and we open up a Pandora box around, only security concerns. Maybe they are not there, like you're saying, we are only watching on the backend artifacts. People are not aware of that. It's not obvious, right? Because it's not there in the API. So it means, explaining to all users, this is not in fact a security issue because we don't actually use whatever is specified in a custom resource. And people are like, how? I'm specifying this kind of resource. Why aren't you watching for it? Why don't you need RBAC to see it, right? It opens up a whole array of, questions, uncertainty that I don't think we can ship that kind of change without bumping the major version of our current API.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that
this
makes
is
sense.
a valid argument, right? But this is a different argument than what we came with, right? I mean, this is something we can agree with, right? If we say this is unsupportable because there are too many concerns around the actual, I guess communication, right, of that information down the line. Even if behind the scenes we still do it correctly, I mean that's acceptable, right? But that's a different point, right? Like we can judge that and we can write that in the RC, I guess, right, as like an option we considered, and then people can watch it and see, okay, this is why we decided to go that way. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a dedicated section in the RFC for exactly this type of, well, why would we choose this? Even if, let's say, it's less user-friendly or less nice, because now we have this artifact instead of the custom resource directly. And the reason is trim down confusion around what things Flux needs to access, is that custom resource in the RBAC and all of that, right?
I think
Anyway,
that
this
both aligns
will-
with your as well as Sunny's understanding, if I get it correctly,
Yes,
right?
Sunny was about,
No.
we don't want custom reps in there. I was about
No.
something else, but yeah.
I can say I had more points. I was discussing this with Kingdom last week. So the reason Flux, the customization, and they have a reference to object because it's a necessity. We had to watch those resources. In this new model, we don't have to watch it. And you are trying to hold on to that necessity, which is not necessary in the new model. Providing
I
more
think
reasons
that was
to it.
never the point, right? We never said we hold on to it because we think it's necessary. We held on to it.
No.
That was always the argument. We always said it's nicer for the user to consume the object
That's the
producing
thing.
the artifacts
To
directly.
remain consistent with the current model, but the current model does it because there is a need for it. The new model, there is no need for it.
The old model has no need for it. The only reason it does it is because it has no other option, because as we just agreed on earlier in the call, there is no separation right now between the artifact and the source controller. So if you have the Helm and the customized controller, the only reason they don't do that right now, it's not because it's not correct, it's because they have no option to do it.
Need is there
Yeah.
because you have to statically say this is the CRD. There is a need for it. Because the
Yeah, but
decision
this
was
need is
made
artificial.
initially.
It's made through the design of the CRD, which is valid, right? This is ultimately why we now
It's
decide
not
to not go
artificial,
for it,
it's how
right?
Flux works, man.
You need a
Anyway.
dynamic watcher. That will solve more problems. A dynamic watcher.
What? Why
If you have
why
a
would you need a
dynamic-
dynamic watcher? If the only thing that you're introducing is you're saying, okay, you would like to have it this way if you would design it, right? You are saying you would like to have it solved through a dynamic watcher so that you don't need the indirection through the owner reference. And that is acceptable. I mean, we can live with it. But all I'm saying is that ultimately the owner reference is a set part of the Kubernetes API, and it's how what setups work currently in the API server. How do you think that the garbage collection works? I mean,
Okay, they
anyway.
have. Okay, simplicity. I don't think it's a need. I don't think we need to stick to that design.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that, right? We already are at that point anyways, right?
I have a few more things to just mention. I was noting it down. So initially when I was talking about the search manager thing, initially I tried to say something else and I went somewhere else. I was trying to say the secret object doesn't have a spec or a status. This artifact need not have a spec or status. It can be some other field. Status seems fine, but spec is not a necessity. It can just have whatever body you need. Next point would be, I discussed this with Paulo, he's our security engineer. He was saying currently in Flux source and the artifact are together. If we separate them, what would be the story of provenance verification? Today, like if you do a verification of Git commits, the verification is in the conditions, status conditions. In status, where would you show that? So the consumer, how would they know that this artifact is verified? And here saying we need to think various threat models, how this can be, these things can go wrong. Make sense? And last I was thinking about looking at the RFC. RFC has a lot of things. It includes some libraries, some toolings. I think, why do we need it? The RFC can just be about introducing a new CRD. That's all. All the extra things that can be third party need not be part of core Flux. We maintainers need not maintain that. There can be separate maintainers for it.
We will
It's
obviously
simplified
not
RFC.
need it once stuff is in Flux. Like if Flux, if we make that through Flux and we expose how Flux generates the artifacts as Stefan said there won't be any need for that.
There are like controller some manager things. There are so many repositories.
Yeah, yeah, obviously we tried to pull out the reusable stuff, or the stuff that you already implemented within the Flux controllers that we would that anybody would need to implement its custom source type. We pulled that out into a library. Of course, we're not saying that Flux has to maintain that library. It's just like essentially exactly the same code. We essentially just copied the code over to use it in a separate controller.
As a POC, so as to show that it could work like that. So we aren't saying that this is something Flux needs to maintain. It's part of Flux already. It's just had been pulled out to show that the POC can work, basically.
Yeah,
The POC.
we will take more things into account when we have to make the storage functions publicly, right? But that's, so in my opinion, what the user-facing changes to Flux are minimum. We'll have to, at the library level, we have to move some things a little bit from source controller, the checksum and the tar function, and then third-party controllers have to figure out on their own how they reconcile. Maybe they generate in memory and they dump it to the tar or whatever. It doesn't have to follow source controller.
Exactly.
We have sub-reconcilers there. It's quite complicated. I'm guessing people that will write simple transformers will not want to do all that crazy stuff that we do there because there is no need for it. So from my conclusion is we need to expose two functions. One, how you take a directory or a path on disk and you create a tar, and then how you create a digest of that tar that can be advertised in the artifact so it's compatible with our kind of source code. And that's in my opinion, that's the only code that we need to expose. Of course, we need to expose the artifact type and status, and that will be done in source controller, and it will have in the source controller API package a new type artifact, which will share the status struct that we have already in there, the API. So it's that I'm thinking it's a very small
Need
change.
to change? Like the verification part, where will you put that?
What do you mean? It's part of the artifact.
Today we don't have it as
typing
part of the
status.
artifact. It's a condition, status condition that says the artifact is verified.
Oh, you are talking about cosign and stuff like that.
Just get verification, provenance, artifact
Yeah,
provenance.
okay. Cosign, PGP, notary, all the stuff that we do. Why would we care about it?
What will happen?
It's whatever implements the their source control. Is their responsibility to verify authentication. Right? Why?
Exactly. That's not Flux's
we
purpose.
don't really care about that, Sunny. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not going to write the standard on how to write your own source control.
Exactly. That's a third-party source controller.
Yeah, you should. The only standard, and what we really need to document, is the required fields in the artifact status, the digest algorithms. You have to have in your controller the same flag as we have in all our controllers, so you can set the checksum algorithms in both of them, and you really need to use the same target zip function that we offer, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you validate, open PGP signatures, cosign, everything that source control does.
It's more about indicating that this source has been verified. You can enable saying only use consume verified sources. What do we do about those things?
I mean, you said it yourself, right? You have a condition in the status, right? That calls for
the
verification.
Artifact will also have a condition.
Mm-hmm. So what's your question?
Artifact will have a condition.
Well, if you want to have verification on the artifact level, which is, I understand what you desire, then that would be the way, right? And the condition times are typed, right? The condition itself is typed in the Flux API.
Yes,
Or is
I
it
was
not?
thinking
But I mean,
it need not
we-
be a condition.
we don't care about it. Like
I mean,
the artifact custom resource will have the status field exactly like we have now in the artifact type. It will also have conditions as an array, and that's it. And then it's up to the producer to come up with their own things. Oh, you want to verify stuff? You can look at how we do it and generate those conditions, right? But our consumers, customized controller, Helm controller, they only look for verifying the integrity of the Flux artifact, because everything that deals with the outside world, verifying cosine signatures, PGP, whatever, that's source controller responsibility. And once source controller has generated the artifact inside, it means that it has passed all those validation. You can inspect the Git repository, see the PGP signatures, OCI repositories, the cosine signatures. All these things are now in the responsibility of the third-party source provider. We don't care about those. They can expose it in the artifact status, or they can expose it in their own custom resource status. We shouldn't impose any kind of things around it, because we are not creating here a standard beyond what it means to expose an artifact for Flux reconcilers to consume it, right? And customized controller and Helm controller don't really care if something was signed, verified, whatever. If it's inside the system, then it's their responsibility, right? I also thought about what Paulo said, and I think we could actually introduce in the multi-tenancy restrictions, or as a global restriction, some flag in Flux that will basically drop artifacts altogether when we deny them.
It should be opt-in. By default, you should not be watching for artifact. If you want to watch, set a flag.
Of course, it will first be as a future flag, right? Because first we'll be releasing artifact v1 alpha 1. We'll have a future flag the same way as Kubernetes does it. We did it before. It will be a future flag where you enable artifact, right? But then when, let's say, artifact will be v1 and we ship that custom resource as GA, we'll remove the future flag, but then we'll allow people, like we do currently with multi-tenancy, and they say, hey, impersonation is required, this is the default, we'll allow them through some flag to, deny third-party sources through the artifact or whatever. We'll think how, but we definitely need to allow people that are not using Everno or whatever to drop this feature if they don't want it, right? The only thing that will still be there, only the artifact type will be installed with source controller. But having a CRD registered in the etcd, I don't think it's an issue with anyone. It's just one more. We have enough. We have 13, now will be 14 CRDs. Yeah.
So I think we all agree that we want to gate this, right? That is definitely clear. I think this should also be clear from the proposal, right?
I can think of some more gating. It's like customized. You can say only artifacts available in this domain should be fetched. If the
Yeah, but
artifact
then,
says
I mean, you can do that, but then this doesn't matter if you just gate it off. We can do that, right? Not a problem. But if you just forbid remote artifacts from being fetched in, then you don't have this problem in the first place, right?
When you say this domain, Sunny, do you mean this API domain or this source
HTTP,
location?
wherever it's downloading, like it will be in the whatever the producer is, their service, right? Under their service. But you're pointing should be able to prevent that. Maybe it should be explicit. Say your producer behind this service should only be accessed for the artifact.
Yeah. So we can basically deny cross namespace calls and so on.
Those things as well.
Yeah. Anyway, the default network function will network policy will will not allow Helm and source controller to access third-party sources if they are not in the same namespace in the Flux system.
They don't
So
have
that's
to, right?
already, yeah, I mean, that's already blocked by default, right? So unless you deploy your third-party source provider in the Flux system namespace, it will not work. You need to change the network policies. You need to add specific network policies with your own controller if it goes to a different namespace for Helm and Customize to be able to reach it. Create an egress rule or whatever.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
but
okay.
that's fine, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
of
the
course.
expectation should be that we by default do not have to touch any of the default settings that we currently have in Flux, right? I think that is a prerequisite.
Yeah. Anyway, if like we can think about, I mean, we are over 1 hour now.
Almost 2 hours.
We can discuss this later on. But to your point, Sunny, I think, yes, we can think of ways of, having some more advanced flags where you can say, yes, I'm allowing artifact, but from this subdomain, which can be scoped to the artifact URL, which is fine. But I think right now in the RFC, there should be a mention that this will be shipped like all things in Flux because it will be alpha under future flag, and later on it will be an opt-in flag that you have to do at installation, or opt-out flag where you can explicitly disable third-party artifacts in the same way where you can disable the running as cluster admin if you do multi-tenancy, something similar to that. And I think that will not, what my concern is that I don't want to ship this feature and all of the sudden people that are running Flux on high regulated environments behind the firewall, whatever, and they'll say, oh, now we need to do a new security audit because you've changed something in Flux and now it can do more than what we have determined it does at the latest security audit, right? And security audits are very expensive, and I don't want to create like all these issues for our users just because we are adding this stuff. So we should allow them to completely disable it if they want it with no third parties involved through a flag or something, and that could be easily achievable.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we agree on that, of course. Like we said, we don't want to change any of the default behavior of Flux as it does right now. Okay.
Cool. Okay.
I will take this all away and update the RFC and the discussion, and put this all into a new perspective.
Cool. Well, next week I'm off. I'm in London. I'm going to. It's 6 years of Flagger since I started the project, and I'm going to the same meetup where the Service Mesh London meetup where I launched Flagger 6 years ago. I'm going to do an anniversary talk, so I'm not going to attend the dev meeting next week, but I'm back the week of December, and we can, if you can update the RFC till then, we can discuss it a little bit more, then create the RFC in the actual repo and move all the things in proper pull request reviews, and invite other people to come out with use cases and so on. Okay,
sounds great.
Stefan, since you won't be here next week, can I quickly ask you a few questions about certain topics? Other topics? Like, again, we have 5 minutes.
Yes.
5 minutes.
I've got to leave. So we'll be in touch, Stefan. In the meantime, everyone in the US, have a nice Thanksgiving, and we'll be in touch then.
Bye.
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 First quick question. Did you read the no proxy thing? Per object proxy, no proxy support?
Yes.
Any objection?
No.
Okay, fine.
No,
Next,
that's fine. Yeah, I didn't I comment on that? It's in package, right?
no, okay. It's in Flux too. It's because it covers everything.
Damn.
That's fine. Next question. I just wanted to mention this. With the new cache, it has a metric, right? The way it's designed or the way it will, it's a natural outcome of how it will be used. The cache will be used by a client like OCI client or a Git client. So the cache has a metric that are like hit and miss metric, which are object specific, which are associated with the object. So there is a need to pass the metric labels to these clients, OCI client or Git client, so that they can pass it on to the metric recorder. I think that's the natural outcome. Cannot do anything, but just letting you know that code would be that way. When you create the OCI client, you will also pass the metric label to the client, which will be passed to the metric collector when it records the metric cache hit or miss. If not there,
I was thinking about that. Wait.
Hmm.
What? So my first question is like I actually looked into this and I have some questions as well. Can I create a client that's not instrumented at all?
Just don't set any metrics.
What turns on the registration of the metrics? Or I have to do all the metrics have to be registered in the main Go of each controller, and you pass
the register to the client, cache client or cache.
Okay. So you do that. Wait a second. So there are two things. Is the metric register, which is a singleton, a global thing. That's one thing, which should go in the main Go, where the client is not instantiated at all. Because the client has to be per resource in the reconciler, because then you know what's the resource kind, the name, whatever. So this is not obvious from the Go doc that you wrote in the package.
It's written, so that doesn't consider these clients. It considers the controller. That's our new design, that we are moving the cache into the clients.
But I would
natural outcome.
Yeah.
What else can you do? We construct the client in every reconciliation.
Yeah, I don't know. I would improve the Go doc somehow to hint to people, hey, you are responsible to do that as well. Because I looked at the Go doc. Okay, I have to register the metrics.
You see,
but what about?
This way?
Oh yeah, I understand why it's this way. What my question was that how are people going to know you need to use it this way? Because it's not a place where you go and see, oh, you need to set up the registers here, which are global. It's okay. What then? Because then you look at the code and see, oh, there are like per object metrics. Where does that go? And it goes on the client constructor. You need to use those extra options. And we also have to say there, like, metrics are optional. You don't have to register this if, let's say, you have an OCI client that does need to expose anything, right? We have this is a public package. Maybe third-party source controllers will use that, right? And for them, maybe doesn't make sense to have the instrumentation.
Okay, that no paragraph with that.
That was my only suggestion. I figured it out. Yeah, this needs to be in the reconciler, but it wasn't obvious from reading the Go doc. And I think people wanting to use the client will have a hard time figuring out what the metric are for.
Okay. Last part, last question. It's related to the common expression language thing.
Yeah.
Any objection with what I commented about, or the limits we need to
Yes.
add?
My request there is I would not add any flags. Go with the defaults, hard-coded defaults like Kubernetes does.
Mhm.
And have some loose restrictions for what we have and ship that. And then later on, if people say, oh, our payload is huge, we are sending 2 megabytes of data and we are hitting the limit, only then we can consider, okay, for all these hard-coded limits, we are going to create dedicated arguments to the controller, document them, whatever.
But those are different kinds of limits. Most of my limits are about resource exhaustion. Can be running something for a long time, consuming a lot of memory for no reason. You can be doing recursive calls for no reason, like creating malicious expressions to have multiple recursions for no reason. We'll just prevent that.
Yeah, and deny them by default. And we see if people actually write these things and they actually, it wasn't a mistake.
Okay,
they
you're
actually
saying set a
need them.
limit for-
Only then allow them to relax
Okay,
the
if
defaults.
they want to.
But I
use-
think
okay,
we should
fine.
set very strict defaults. Like this should be like no recursion. Like why are you doing this? Is to determine the name and namespace of what you should be reconciled from the current examples that we have, the payloads that GitHub, GitLab, Google Cloud translates. They are like extremely simple. These payloads will never go over the 1 megabyte limit of etcd. No one sends a payload of tens of megabytes of data just to tell you, yes, we have pushed the container registry. So we should have the default, like Kubernetes does, 1 megabyte the payload, very, very low CPU cycles that the conditions should use, because there is no logical reason why would you write complex conditional expressions there. You are just extracting some names, maybe you do a replace, and that's it, right? And it's yeah.
I think that's okay. Initially, it was like we didn't have any restrictions. If we have some default restrictions, okay, we don't need to provide override flags for that, fine. But the initial point was we need some limits on this. Okay,
Yeah, and I'm for adopting the Kubernetes limits as a minimum. Maybe even lower, because so in Kubernetes use case, you are not just doing data extraction, you are validating like whole custom resources, Kubernetes objects, which can be quite complex. The validation logic can be quite complex. In our case, it's more about extracting two strings, right? And figuring out, should I or should I not? It's a Boolean expression, right? So I don't think we should, have like this hugely relaxed, you could use so many CPU cycles, you shouldn't be using it. So let's put some defaults which are close to the ones that I found in Kubernetes thing, ship it like that, and then see, oh, people are running into limits, it's actually an issue, there is a valid use case why you do like crazy stuff in there, and then if that's valid, a valid use case, we can then, okay, we are going to allow you to override this using flags, and we will translate and create 5 flags or whatever. But I'm not for adding a bunch of flags now. I think setting good defaults should be enough. What we have already in there.
One part of this. So the evaluation can take some time. Should we set explicit context with a timeout just for this evaluation? because the incoming request has its own timeout, which can be controlled by the client. And we just take that, they can set it to 1 hour. For this evaluation part, I think we, or even the whole handler part, I think we need our own timeout instead of just taking the incoming client's context. In case of the, what's the other one? Receiver and the other one, yeah, event handler, right? Event handler has, I think, 15 seconds of timeout, just hard coded. Should we do the same here?
It's
It's
not.
not even,
We don't have.
we do have it.
We don't have the timeout set 10 seconds.
In receiver, I don't think we have. It just takes whatever the incoming request context is.
No, we should have. That's unrelated to this.
Or
Doesn't matter if you have a cell expression or not. We should have a timeout from like the one I've put it in the other server.
the event handler.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought maybe Kevin changed it, I have to say. But it's
Yeah.
not there, that I noticed.
Oh, another thing related to that. So I'm quite concerned about reports of errors with unexpected end of JSON input. And I think we broke something in the last version of source controller, of notification controller. So have you
Which
seen those?
provider? No, I did.
So look,
I think I
if
saw
you-
that. I didn't open it.
So it's one issue in notification controller where people are saying, oh, customize controller and handle controller are sending events to notification controller. Notification controller errors out and drops the event, right? Which is very, very bad because then they lose the alerts. And there is one report on GitHub. And now today I've seen the same report on Slack. So this is, I don't think we can blame some network issue here. I think there is something wrong going on with notification control. I don't know what. But it is quite concerning. I don't know if you have time next week to, I don't know, add a comment on that
I can
issue,
check
how
that.
we can replicate this stuff. But it's quite concerning because yeah, you basically lose, you no longer receive alerts, which is very bad from a incident management perspective, right?
I'll see the what triggers this in control. See, let's go.
Yeah, I think someone on Slack also posted the thread stack with where it fails. Anyway, we can ask that person to give us more details around it. But it's if this thing persists, it's like we need to figure out what happened, because until Flux 2.4, I never seen this error reported, never. So something definitely happened with our handler, because this is in our handler. We receive the event serialization, which is JSON, and then the handler here in notification controller says, oh, the JSON body is not closed, and it drops the whole thing. And of course, the controller will not resend that body unless the error persists or it does a retry. That can happen after whatever the timeout is set, and so on. So it can be, I'm not sure how widespread it is, because it's also very hidden. You not figure out this happens unless you look at notification
Check the
controller
logs.
logs, because there is no error, no nothing, and you miss a bunch of errors from Flux itself. You have no idea they are there. You have no idea it actually fails at this stage, which is bad.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. Thanks, Kingdom, for hanging out with us for so long.
Yeah.
It's